I was hoping it would rain today, 'cause I'd like to stay inside, piss most of the day away for the sake of staying dry. And what would I do with all that time? Roll one, get inside my mind, sing a couple of songs and write a few good words, pretending I never heard you say the things you say. Looking back in time today, there's a few things that I'd change. Wishing I could right some wrongs and erase a couple of names. Well, praying don't work, but sometimes it's fun to talk out loud about the shit you want done. Don't know about you, I got a real long list, starting with the wish I didn't have to miss those things, the things you say. And all the things you told me, I never thought they could be true. Must have been the kind of things you say when you have to. It's too late when I finally saw it in your quiet eyes. Now I've run out of chances and you have run out of time. But I feel your words upon me now, and I carry them all around. And if we meet again, I think I'll have it figured out. But who's to say when that'll be? I guess I'll wait around and see. And that's why I call it a meantime love, time just spent thinking of those things, the things you say. Those things, the things you say. Those things, the things you say.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, live here in Denver, Colorado, and serendipity reigns supreme. As I continue along here, I get hip to my generation, or cats that are even younger than me, who are performing and creating new music vocabulary on the bandstand. Taylor Scott, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
You know, I wanted to have you talk to your musical brothers and sisters around the world about, for your own point of view, how do you play spiritual music? Not formula trip music, but how do you tap into the spiritual component of it?
Right, man, that's a big question. I don't know, I've been playing music for a long time and have gone through a lot of different phases, kind of growing up with it. I'm, a younger cat, but still, I've been doing it for about 10 years on stage, and found that for me, connecting is just listening really closely, or at least that's something that helps a lot on stage. Kind of music, I'm sitting here playing an acoustic guitar right now, but on stage with the bands I play in, there's form to tunes, but there's a whole lot of improvisation, and what I've found is just allowing yourself to listen really closely and with your whole body. It's really freeing because you can respond and react to the tiny little things that happen. The drummer leans in a little bit more to the kick drum, and if you're there present enough to pick that up, then that changes the way you play your next note and things like that. So to me, I guess that's kind of technical, but...
No, it's perfect. But I do want to ask you about this idea of, because I've been talking to Cass Clayton about it, it's just the idea of leaving the head of the tune. Like what was the first experience you had in a band where you would be able to leave the head of the tune and just stretch the tune out, where maybe you'd even lose where the one is, but ultimately you'd all be able to come back in on the one. To me, that is some of the most spiritual music, and it's very hard to do in a good way. And you've been on the bandstand since you were 14.
Right.
Can you talk about the first time outside of your radio, the radio-friendly tunes. I'm talking about leaving the head of the tune, losing the one, that transcendent experience,
Right.
and how it happens, and how you work up to that within a band.
I can't remember a specific first time that happened to me. The band that I started in junior high was kind of like a rock and roll and blues thing. And then I got really into, outside of just that, I got really into soul music and jazz. So I can't name a specific time, but around the time I was like 16 or 17, we started, like you're saying, moving from just the traditional form of the tune and getting into exciting and sometimes even like risky places on stage, which can be scary. And that's a cool thing to embrace, that there's a risk there. Because I feel like...
Can you talk to younger cats about how to embrace that? I just feel like there's a lot of people that are worried about taking chances.
Right.
All right? And so just talk about, the best you can, about going for it.
Right. Well, I feel like if you spend enough time with your instrument, both on and off stage, taking playing and practicing seriously, then there's a comfort level that comes with that. And if you can leave that behind, as far as like your headspace when you get on stage and start playing with other people, by which I mean you just kind of transcend something above being technically proficient, because that's already there if you spent the time, and you're always working to get better. But if you can kind of leave that headspace when you're creating music with other people, because you've spent the time required, to where you can just kind of go where the music takes you. And I always liked the phrase, allow the music to have a say, because everybody kind of tries to control everything, or at least their own playing. And that's cool to a certain level, but I feel like if you can lose that fear a little bit and let the music have a say. And listening, sometimes it's hard to explain, because at first you don't even know what it is you're listening for or to. But it's just about being receptive to what comes to you and what the music puts into the air. And once I don't want to say figured it out, because I'm still figuring it out, but once somebody told me that, and that got into my head, that really changed the way I played, especially live and in a room with people.
What kind of specifically jazz did you get off on? Because of late, for me, I've been listening to a lot of Bill Evans, the trios from the Vanguard, and what's interesting is it's just a trio. It's just drums, bass, and piano. But the conversation, it's really just about having a conversation. It's not, and that was really the issue, is how have you learned to say what you need to say without wanking it? Because sometimes you get people, nobody wants to see people wanking it up there for 15 minutes.
Right.
So, but outside of the rudiments, how do you know when you've said what you need to say, and they're able to continue the conversation? That's the most essential part of spiritual music.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important to remain humble, to have a sense of humility there, because the players that I know or have come across that just say too much, I feel like it comes from one of two things, and maybe they're connected, but it would either be kind of a fear-based thing, overcompensating, or it would be just thinking you're a hotshot all the time and that everybody must want to see and hear that. And I guess sometimes that's the case for a minute, but ultimately that's taken away from letting the music have a say at some point. So like you said, when people just listening to wanking for 15 minutes because you think it's really cool, sometimes you look out in the crowd and those people are yawning at you, man, because you're in your own space. And that's if you're not paying attention to the room, I don't necessarily mean paying attention like watching people for reactions or anything like that. That's not my bag. But just being present in the room and playing with people and not at them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's the ability to get the collective consciousness moving from the band to the audience.
Right. And as far as the jazz thing, when I first got into jazz, it was coming straight from blues. I was really, really into blues. Sure. So started listening to the swing and bop forms, which really, obviously follow that tradition, and build on it. And like you said, you were talking about Bill Evans. I've been listening to a bunch of Oscar Peterson Trio lately. A bunch.
I was curious because some of his stuff. It's funny you bring that up, because some of his stuff. I'm producing a documentary on Stan Getz, and there's this one album, Stan Getz with the Oscar Peterson Trio, Steve Gadd, who will be tuning into this interview. He can't stop listening to that album, and there's no drummer.
Right.
So the rhythm comes, it's guitar, bass, piano, horn.
Right.
How did you Can you talk about your internal time feel and how you
Sure.
develop that? Because I really think that there's an over-reliance today in some settings of the rhythm section being obsessed with where the one is. And actually, a lot of cats, you need just to have your own internal time feel and
Right.
good time to,
Yeah.
to thrive. So how did that you cultivate that?
Well, another good music to listen to for that is bluegrass, like old school bluegrass, as you probably know. I mean, this is most of the time this doesn't have a drummer.
No trap set.
And and you're hearing the 2 and the 4 most of the time coming off the guitar and the mando, you know. So that's another great thing to listen to. And I know a couple of those Oscar Peterson records you're talking about with where it's just guitar and
Drummerless.
Right,
it's
right.
freaking, and Ray Brown's just locking in the groove, you know?
Yeah, totally. I think it's also important to just find time throughout the day. I don't mean set aside time. I mean throughout the day as you're walking around. Like there's time going on in my head right now. You know what I'm saying? I don't really think about it because that would be a little weird and that would probably be a challenge to talk to. But it's there all the time. So for me, growing up and becoming aware of that and trying to be able to play where you don't have to have somebody else locking you in. Because that's a funny thing about musicians is they think like that's the drummer's job, which is super weird to me. It's obviously,
but you know, you nailed it. It people have had designated roles now,
right?
Which is not the case. I mean, in some ways, the drummer's job, in my mind, is to create colors.
Yeah, it's sweet to be able to flip it on its head or whatever the traditional expectation is. But I find like just finding a rhythm at all times. You know, I'm singing a tune in my head at almost any time, and you know, you become unaware of it. But sometimes if I think about it, I realize like, oh, I'm singing that tune, that rhythm's in my head, like right now. And as you're walking around, it's there. And trying to understand tempo and feel and find the one during the day, you know.
Find the one during the day.
Yeah, it's important.
This is profound.
Yeah, I get crap from people. Why are you clapping all the time? Why are you snapping all the time? It's like, never mind. I'm sorry, you can't hear it. And it's just...
But it is, I mean, it's the cadence, it's how you walk. It's how you know, and anyway, the audience would like to... Please feel free to play another tune if you'd
sure.
like. You know?
That one I opened with was an original tune. Well, I play electric guitar with the band and solo and stuff, but we're not doing that today. So I'll do my songwriter stuff. So that one was called The Things You Say. I'll do one from our upcoming record. This is called Surrounded. I am surrounded by robots, stared into glowing screens, plugged into the wall, they won't look at me at all. And I guess it's not for me. I would like to know a few more people. I only know 10 or 12 it seems. And if you know any more, send them right up to my door. We'll have a drink and talk about these things. Where did it go? That thing that lets you know that you're in the right town at the right time with the right folks. Where did it go? I am surrounded by the cool kids, but trying all that hard don't impress me. I'll ask one now and then about the latest fashion trend, funny clothes in place of personality. Living in some old fucked up TV show. It seemed so unrealistic at the time, but now that it's all real and we all forgot how to feel from all that stuff they slipped into our minds. Where did it go? That thing that lets you know that you're in the right town at the right time with the right folks. Where did it go? I am surrounded by pretenders who hang it up when nobody's looking. A love that's all for show, for a thing they'll never know. Convenient validation is the king. Someone told me, man, you just don't get it. Well, I'm sorry, friend, but I'm afraid I do. It ain't hard to figure out what these fools are all about if you listen for a minute or two. Where did it go? That thing that lets you know that you're in the right town at the right time with the right folks. Where did it go? It's called Surrounded.
Can you talk about the germ of the song and how these songs come to you? I mean,
Yeah.
and what that particular one was about?
That one's like about being kind of frustrated with my generation.
Talk about, and what specifically what? I mean, because millennials, this is important.
Right. So I just
You said validation. There was some really hip 2 words there.
yeah, there's a line that says, "I'm surrounded by pretenders who hang it up when nobody's looking, and validation is the king." So that idea is like, man, I'm not supposed to talk bad on anybody, but I do run into a lot of people, whether it's online or on the street, who like seem to be doing things so that they can show you that they did them.
Dig.
I think that's weirdly popular, like surrounding the subjects of art, music, even like poetry, things like that now. I just noticed a lot of people, seem to be doing things to let you know they're doing them.
And tell me why that's antithetical to the artistic bent of Taylor Scott. I think you're spot on.
Sure, yeah. Well, for me, it's like an all day, every second kind of thing that's going. And I'm not, that doesn't necessarily make me special, but that's just like for the way that I feel about music or, any number of things, but particularly music. I mean, it's not something that I can like hang up. Like that's that line, hang it up when nobody's looking. It's like, if nobody's looking, is this worth doing? And to me, the answer is clearly yes. But to some people, that doesn't seem to be the case. And, I don't mean to sound like judgmental, but it's something you notice throughout the day. And that song kind of starts there, I guess.
When you just cut this new album, when you go on a live show, is the crowd expecting to hear exactly, this can go back in your career, but I mean, do you play this stuff exactly off the album, or does the song take on a life of its own when it's played live?
Yeah, we totally play things kind of to the room and differently live. I mean, there are certain tunes that have, a little bit more of a strict form that are, quick 3-minute and out tunes, and that you should always kind of have those.
Are those more like first set tunes?
To me, I don't really have rules like that.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the room. Like sometimes we're at a stage now where, some people who are coming to the show know us, and some people just happen to be there because we're playing clubs, So that's, I listen to a lot of stand-up comedians talk about that same thing, and I've tried to, kind of learn from hearing those guys talk.
Which ones?
Well, like lately I've been listening to a bunch of Joey Coco Diaz, his podcast, The Church of What's Happening Now. Like that's what I listened to this morning.
Right.
But there's a bunch of stuff out there that you can learn from at this point. But like going back to how we stretch tunes, it kind of just depends on how we feel in the room. I don't necessarily go into a room and look to people please. That's not really my style. I get in trouble for it sometimes.
No, this is fantastic. It's totally out of the Lee Morgan, Miles Davis book.
Yeah.
Because those cats were saying at a certain point, we dig what we're playing,
right,
and we hope you dig what we're playing.
Yeah.
But even if you don't, we're still going to play what we're playing.
Sure.
And I don't think there's anything to. I mean, you might take grief for that, but that to me is absolutely authentic and what needs to happen more.
Right, and it depends on where the audience is coming from too, which is something you can't necessarily control. But I'm with you on that, where it's like I've always told people, and maybe check back in 10 years, I might have changed my mind, I don't know. But I've always said, it's like, you got to be enjoying what you're doing, because I see a lot of fakery happening, and that's super weird to me, not only just as a concept, but for me, I am almost utterly incapable of being ingenuine, which is another thing that gets me in trouble sometimes. But on stage, like that's the most important thing to me in one way is being honest. And I don't mean honest like not telling lies. I mean like the way that you're playing and what's coming across that way. And for me, if I walk into a room where it seems like you know, I would have to go in that direction to please certain people. I'm unfortunately, in some cases, just like not willing to do that. You know, I mean, I'm never willing to do it. I just mean, in some cases, it's unfortunate.
It's really. Can you talk about the? Are you? Is there fakery on the bandstand, in the studio, or both?
I'm hardly ever in the studio with anybody other than people I'm working with, so that's kind of hard to
Give
say.
an example of this fake. I like this idea. What are you riffing on there?
Well, man, it's hard to explain.
I mean, what gets you really teed off? What gets you pissed off when you see it?
Well, I feel like people, if they're really dialed in, can tell if you mean something or not. Not everybody is necessarily that dialed in, and that's fine. But people that are, I feel like they can tell, and sometimes it's a hard thing to put words to, but people can just kind of tell. So it's a hard question to answer as far as how literally I notice if someone's getting a little fake with it, you know. But it's a feeling you get, and there's like a hamming it up thing that kind of, you know, grinds my gears a little bit.
Well, well, again, that's just like entertainment wanking kind of thing. But,
yeah.
you know,
there's a place for it.
Absolutely.
You know, but
I mean, you're only 24 years old, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's profound. And so you haven't been on the earth that long.
Right.
But, I mean, in your mind, being that you were steeped in the blues, you grew up in the regional bastion of Wyoming. I'm curious about that, actually, the regional sound of Wyoming. We'll get to that. But I'm curious about, in your mind, how the significance of music has changed in our culture. I was interviewing, I was transcribing my interview with a singer, Dee Dee Bridgewater, and she was talking about it being in the 70s, in Black America, in jazz, and in blues. I don't want to sound Pollyannish, but people were sitting around the table. They were living the music.
Right.
Today, it's more for pacification. It's more for background. From your point of view, how has the significance of music changed in our culture? Because what you're going towards is what I'm trying to promote.
Sure.
And what I'm trying to do for future generations.
I think now, you know, I've noticed, because I like a lot of different kinds of music. I mean, we've already kind of talked about
It's all music.
Yeah. I find that it's become, to me, it seems like a little bit more of a special interest thing. Whereas before, and I wasn't here, so, you know, back then. But
you've been raised, you've been steeped in it.
Right.
But just riff any way you want on it.
Right. But the like certain tunes or records or artists that were coming out would affect, I don't want to say the entire culture, but in some cases the entire culture, and others, like, I mean, even just how more prevalent jazz was in those days as far as a social commentary, you know, and that, I don't want to say it's gone away by any means, but I've found that it seems to be more special interest. Like, I talk to specific groups of people that are way into old school singer-songwriter music, Townes Van Zandt, things like that. And then other specific people are super into jazz, and that's probably always been the case, but now it feels like, especially when you leave pop music, by which I mean, you know, just the general, what you're hearing on the radio, you know, commercial radio, country pop and things like that. Once you leave that, I find that, like I said, it's just like a special interest thing.
What is this special? I need to know more about that. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's something that certain smaller groups of people, not small by any means, but smaller than just the general whole population, like dives into certain music, which makes it for a really cool but different music scene. So that's why there are all these artists you've never heard of filling up, you know, 1,000-seat, 10,000-seat theaters or places like that. At least that's what I've noticed, is because I'll drive by the Gothic Theater, you know, or places like that sometimes, which are pretty big, and see on the marquee a bunch of band names that I don't know.
Yes.
And I'm fairly plugged in.
Right.
I am a full-time musician.
Right.
I'll see band names I don't know, and they're sold-out shows because do you know what I mean? Like, there's a smaller group of people that are super dedicated to certain artists, certain
So maybe what you're saying is that their palettes are almost so small that they're locked into a certain niche.
Sure.
Whereas opposed to just, I mean, do they have a wide enough view of music?
Sort of, yeah. And I take that.
I mean, everybody's got to sing for their supper. I get that. I'm
Right.
glad those people are selling out the arenas. But
Right.
Are you saying it's too narrow a special interest?
That is a point that could be made. However, it's not really the one I was making.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think of it as kind of a cool thing because, you know, there are a certain number of major artists in the pop world, et cetera, that are kind of dominating the radio waves and things like that. But there are all these cool scenes that are smaller, but not necessarily small. And I feel like before, again, I wasn't here, but just from reading the history and things, it was like you either kind of made it or you didn't. Whereas now, there's all these people I've never heard of that have this huge following because they're saying something that communicates to those people, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
That's really it's so great because I can get trapped in my hermetically sealed radio bubble and sort of lose that perspective. So,
right.
I would like you to talk about perseverance as a musician. Again, you're only 24. If I heard correctly, though, recently, or you developed a collaboration or relationship with Los Lobos.
Right.
And now you have an opportunity to really stretch and really grow, whatever that means in Taylor Scott's world. But perseverance got you to this point.
Yeah,
and I want you to talk about that because there's plenty of cats from your generation that, I mean, touring is it's a burn. I mean, it's hard, and you're just fighting to negotiate gas money, let alone you have all this pay to play stuff going on now, and so being that you're on the cusp of something or you're about to grow, I want you to talk about how perseverance got you there.
Well, I think perseverance as far as for me, music and a music career goes, but really whatever it is you're into, you have to wake up thinking about that thing, whether for me it's music, I mean, I'm not saying I don't ever talk about or do other things, but in general, it's always there, and it has to be something, in my view, that you would do for free if you could, like in a perfect world. I would still be going out there and doing this.
I love it. It's a
like
calling. It's a calling at the,
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, perseverance, I feel like this is part of it, but for me, there was no other option. I don't mean because I'm not able or smart enough to do something else. It's that, like, for me, mentally and emotionally, there's not another option because this is like who I am, which helps with the perseverance because even when it gets really strong, it's like, well, you better get up and drive to the next gig because,
it's you, man. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the cool thing about it is even if the day is awful, like you're talking about being on the road, especially as an independent band, you can have pretty rough days. But once we get on stage and playing, ultimately we're happy. I mean, things can go wrong, things can get weird. You play weird venues and things like that sometimes, but in general, like, all that stuff kind of melts away once we get into the groove, which is really helpful if you remember that.
Well, you go through all the crap during the day just to play. Right. It all falls away.
And there's a lot of crap. Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it's just and it's grueling.
Yeah.
I'd just also like you to talk. I mean, you're the leader of your band,
right?
So, what are again? We live in a very verbose time. People love to micromanage. They love to talk verbally, and a lot of the great masters of music were great nonverbal communicators on the bandstand.
Right.
So, what are the most important qualities of leadership on the bandstand for Taylor Scott at the old age of 24?
Man, I've been fortunate to be in the leader position and also in the follower position, in the sideman position, a good bit in my young career. And that's, especially being in the sideman position, has taught me the most about how to treat a band.
What did you learn as a sideman, and talk about how you've carried that over to leadership?
I guess just once you've been on both sides of that stage, once you've been in both sets of shoes, you understand how it feels when a band leader makes you feel, just shitty in some way, or great, and understand, like, I just picked up things from working with people that I worked with that to me worked or didn't, and so I try to bring that to my own group. I think it's important to make the musicians feel comfortable, but in order to do that, you got to pick guys that you trust musically. Because if I pick people, I've done this before where I've had people in the group that, after a bit you realize your musical morals don't really line up. And then that's really hard to make each other feel comfortable from both sides of it. So to me, trying to, if you can, find musicians to work with you where in general your musical morals match up. That doesn't mean you listen to the same music necessarily. That's not really the point, but the morals of it.
What specific morals? This is really fascinating.
So, I mean, for me, if you've, it all kind of comes from your record collection, It comes from that and just who you are as a person. And
how you treat people.
Right. Yeah.
How you communicate. But morality.
Right. So, I mean, if we've all been at, dinner or out for a drink where the person you're talking to, or one of them at the table, needs to talk over everybody all the time. That happens on stage. And especially if you're coming from music where that's more of like the idea of it, and it turns into like a show off kind of thing.
What's that music called?
Well, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
You're not going to bait me into that one. I'm not getting.
But if you come from that, and so then how do you work that? How do you work out that moral?
Right. So for me, like someone just talking over you the whole time, versus somebody on guitar, bass, drums, keys, whatever, that just always needs to fill every space, and that could be because their mind is coming from a type of music where that is, more accepted, I guess. So just little things like that, where if that was the kind of music I was from, I would love to play with that drummer or that bass player or whatever. But it's important to, line kind of those morals up with the people you're going to play with, because it's not even like right or wrong. I mean, at some point it can feel that way, and I feel that way about a number of things, but I don't even want to have that argument. It's just more about, do our visions line up?
Absolutely. There's wasted energy there,
right,
because it's a drag on stage. It's not about right and wrong.
And once you have that, once your visions line up, one, you can just trust each other to play. And if you're hearing something as a band leader that you're not into, it's not because they don't know what's going on or where you're coming from. You know that you just need to tell them, like, hey, let's change this chord voicing or this bass line, et cetera, and nobody gets mad and offended. But if you're coming from a place of not understanding each other, people get mad and offended. Well,
wow.
why do I have to play it that way?
Wow.
And it's like, that should never be an issue from either side, But it takes it takes a lot from both sides to make that whole harmony.
And these are things that you're going through in the real time. I mean,
yeah,
your band right now, like what band is going to go on tour?
Right, I'm really happy with everybody who plays with me. We're working a good bit at this point, but as an independent act, the tours are sporadic. They're both in time and place. So I tend to have two full lineups, and my band's only a quartet, including me. But I tend to have two guys I can call for drums who I just love playing with, and I know the gig and are ready to go, and same for bass and keys. So it kind of varies. But I'm fortunate now to be in a position where everybody that I call to play with, I look forward to playing with them. Which is,
there's none of this morality threshold. It's
right.
You're all on the same frequency.
Right. Yeah, and that's not to say everybody has to agree about everything at all, but just understanding where each other are coming from and kind of lining
accepting
up
criticism, accepting advice, maybe
right.
is the right.
Well, and that's another way to make like any gig fun. Because we end up playing places, or have in the past, that are not the most fun places to play. Or sometimes you play to an empty room, a Monday night in, Salida, Kansas or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like maybe nobody's going to be there. But if you're with those people who it's fun to play with,
right.
and especially like you were saying earlier with the improvising and, coming into different versions of the live tune and things like that, like we could have fun just sitting there in front of two drunk people at the bar. If we're all in line with that. I'm not saying I want to do it every night.
I'm telling you that it's the same mentality that guys who played with like Gene Harris, great piano player, they playing burning trio music, and they'd be playing some of the most spiritual stuff, and they'd look out and there were like three people there, but they were having a ball.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times that.
It's just the life of a musician.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I listened to I was just listening to a Jimmy Smith record the other day. I forget which one it was right now, but a live record, and at the end of these tunes, just blazing, you'd hear like, 6 to 8 hands doing this. It's like
we're listening to this Grover Washington Jr. show from '73, and it's like it could blow your skull open, and the people are just very polite clapping at the end. I'm sure some of them were in a very zen state, meditating out, but I think that's just the life, and that's part of the perseverance.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about playing with people who you just like, your vision kind of lines up. It's fun. It's fun regardless of what's going on in the rest of the room. I mean, certain things can still throw you off, obviously. And like I said, I don't want to play to an empty room every day. But if we have to, we can just grin at each other and let's blow this thing apart,
Well, I mean, Taylor Scott here, you want to play with one more tune?
Sure.
Yeah, great.
Sure. I'll play another kind of newer one. It's called Dance All Night. Dance all night and have no fear. Someday we just disappear. Let your heart roll off your tongue. Sing to me till the morning comes. find me, 'cause I do it too. And I will meet you anytime. Break this troubled heart of mine. If I know you, you'll take the risk. Then say you never asked for this. And add one more thing to the list. Things you won't forget. Do, 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 do. Remember when we had it all? Baby, we were bound to fall. Since you last saw me, things ain't worked out perfectly. Well, hey now, baby, we can't have that. I'm turning around and I'm coming back. And it may be one last regret. I know I won't. All night and have no fear. Someday we just disappear. Let your heart roll off your tongue. Sing to me till the morning comes.
You know, I just would like to ask you before we wrap up, have you ever reached a period in your life where you just had to surrender and let go of something and it freed you and liberated you? I mean, you're only 24, so I'm 40, but I've had these experiences along the way in my life, very definitive things where by surrendering, everything fell away. All my hang-ups fell away. Is there something you can point to that has allowed you to get to a point now where you can really be yourself, or getting closer to being yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that happens to all of us at some point, you know, whether it's like old loves that you can finally let go, which, I mean, I'm 24, so, you know, I'm not going to preach about it.
But you're an old soul, man, you know?
But yeah, that's happened. Those kind of things have happened to me, and it's cool to, you know, like I finally, at one point, I was dragging kind of I don't know, what I hoped would be a love story from when I was younger into my adulthood that just didn't belong. And I tried really hard to do it because I felt like it did. And, it didn't work out, which was hard at first. And then I realized later, it's like, that wasn't me at all. That wasn't, and I would have stuck with this person for, I hope she's not listening to this.
Well, I'm sure, yeah.
I doubt it. But
this is a human relationship you had.
Yeah, a human
and you were trying to really,
one.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, and trying to pull that didn't really belong anymore into a new phase of my life, and a new phase of this person's as well. And like once that ended, and it's sad at first, you know, and then like really felt like, man, I was trying to drag who I was when I was in high school, like the parts that aren't me anymore, into this part of my life to save like a relationship. So like that would be one example of a time where once I let that go,
right,
that I felt like I'm really me for about 2 years now.
That's beautiful.
You know what I mean?
That's beautiful.
Like,
it was a break. It was a break.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it was because of that, but just things that came together in my life, and like that was one of those symbolic things that once it fell away, it's like, oh man, I've been working towards, or I don't know, finding out who I am for a long time, and then some hit, and now I'm like actually more comfortable in my skin than ever before by letting something go. So I guess hopefully.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, I would say, I mean, did it have any noticeable effect on your stage performance as well? I mean,
yeah, totally.
Where it made you. That's really more what I'm getting at, where you can be yourself on the bandstand.
Totally. And I mean, because that's part of it for me. Like what goes on during the day is part of how the music comes out.
That's right.
Always.
It should be your life.
It's totally relevant to things like that that happen, and also for me, letting go of genre was sweet. Like I tried so hard because I liked so many different things. I don't mean just liked them. I mean like dove all the way in head first to so many different things. And then finally, but I was always trying to either keep it blues or keep it soul music or whatever, And then it was so cool to let go of that and go, no, if we do it with the right intention, we can play anything we want on a live show especially. And if the audience is hip, as well, and
it's your accent on that music.
Together. Yeah,
absolutely.
You can do whatever you want. That was huge for me. I'm in my group, which plays around with, obviously I'm a songwriter, so it has that, but it's interpreted through funk and blues and rock and roll and jazz, which is a thing that freaks people out sometimes, but I'm willing to do it.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and some people like really tie themselves down to one thing, and that's awesome too. It's just like, for me, it's been liberating to not have that attitude about everything at this
Do you have
stage.
cats that come up to you at the shows and say, man, you turned me on my head, you turned this stuff around because people came in, or you're just playing stuff your way? And have you had some converts along the way? Is what I'm saying. People that were just inspired by the way that you put the music together in your own way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like we still play some blues and things like that. And I, growing up, I was just, I sold my soul for the Howlin' Wolf stuff and all these things.
Sure.
And we had a very specific way that we were playing all those things, and that's super cool. And it showed me, it taught me a lot. But now we can take things like that and kind of, like you said, turn them on their head a little bit. And some people, it's blasphemy, to some people.
Right, but even they can still respect it. Or
sure.
I mean, some people maybe never. But I mean, the idea of opening people to the idea that you can put your own. The minute you say blues or jazz, it's 20 different definitions to 20 different people.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just like, to me, I just want to throw all the labels away. I want to throw all the genres away because I think it restricts the increase of musical vocabulary.
Yeah, I feel like we've definitely had converted some people into more that way of thinking along the way, and because we'll go from an old school country tune into an instrumental funk thing, but we try to do it without seeming like we're changing flavors. It's like
it's subtle, but there.
Yeah. So I feel like
you got to have a hip crowd, though.
Yeah, and that's been super fun to turn people on to you go to a blues show and then maybe we'll cover a Townes Van Zandt tune, and those people maybe didn't know what that was all about or assumed they wouldn't like it, but then a lot of times you end up turning people on to things like that, which is super fun and kind of part of our duty, I think, if you take music, in the way that
if you live it, the way Taylor Scott lives it. One final question for you, my man, is I haven't run across a lot of cats like this, but there are, because they definitely don't want to be on the radio and be interviewed, but there's a lot of cats who are much older than us, and they've had a huge amount of success. They've won the awards, the gold records, they have plenty of money in the bank. But the phone isn't ringing as much anymore for them. They're older, and they become very resentful. And the cats that I talk to that are the same age, that have the same accomplishments, or similar, that are at peace with themselves, tell me that the reason that there's this sort of resentment from some certain people is because they felt that they were responsible for the music, when in fact the musicians that are at peace with themselves realize that they are merely a conduit for the music coming through them from the heavens.
Sure.
You talk about your own point of view as it relates to that, and because that's an ego deflator.
Right.
To me, it's like the idea of understanding you really aren't responsible. I mean, you're playing the notes, but all the themes and the love, and it's coming through. You are merely a conduit for it, and I want you to get your thoughts on that.
Right, and I agree. It's also important to know that it takes somebody being aware of it to channel it. You know what I mean? So the person is still in some way, I think, responsible for it, as far as that goes.
Yes,
You know, and as far
of
as
course.
observing those things and being aware and being open to them, which is an important thing because a lot of people aren't open to that. Even musicians I know aren't open to, like I said earlier, letting the music have a say, which is kind of what this is kind of what I meant, what you just said when I brought that up. Man, I'm always trying to get better, and I find that I try to play with musicians that inspire me and that are better than I am. So I'll be on the bandstand, sometimes beating myself up about this, but I try not to take it too seriously. But I mean, you're playing, it's like, man, there's a thing that's about to come through here, and I want to work to open that gate, which takes some work on my part. So for me, it's kind of a blend of those two things that you were saying, where it's absolutely coming from somewhere else. But I do have a responsibility to open up those doors, I think.
Oh, that's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah, so I think, it's just a blend of those two ways of thinking. It's served me well so far.
Are you going on tour with Los Lobos?
No, not right now. There's some stuff in the works for the future, but Steve Berlin, who's in that band, produced our upcoming record. And that's kind of how we got, to be hanging with those guys. And I've got to play with them a handful of times. We've opened for them on, 3 or 4 shows regionally. And so I end up getting to play with, David Hidalgo and all these great guys. And they've been super gracious to me.
I think they're a Southern Arizona band, actually. They're from
East LA.
East LA,
yeah.
Actually. Okay, I'm thinking of somebody else. Okay, good. But anyway,
yeah,
it's invigorating to talk to you. You're not even my peer. You're younger than me, but
Thanks for having me,
man, it was such a ball, and I look forward to continuing to chronicle your career as you evolve and you keep growing sonically and your enlightenment continues to grow. So bless you, brother. Thank you for being part of the program.
Man. Thank you for having me.
All right. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. See you all later.